Welcome to Needle and Curves. My name is Micheline, and today I have for you kind of like my tips for working with tricky fabric. I've been working with this challis, I'm not really sure which one it is. I say challis. I've been working with this challis fabric, and I cut it out once already, and I realized that I cut the back ×2 instead of on the fold, so I had to redo the back. And I decided to use this as an opportunity to share how I work with really tricky fabrics that like to move around when you're trying to cut it out. And so I have them written down here on the tips that I use, and I have some video showing how I use these tips. The first thing is to cut single fold. Trying to line things up. This is I love print, as you can see, as I'm wearing print now, florals in particular, but things like stripes, sometimes even florals, could be hard to match up if you're trying to do that. Also, if even with this fabric, trying to make a crisp fold down the center was a bit difficult, so whenever possible, cut single fold. So that's the first one. The second is to stabilize your fabrics. I use two methods for stabilizing my fabric, stabilizing this fabric in particular. And the first is I starched it, and for this particular fabric, I use June Taylor's Quilter's Starch Savvy, formulated for quilting cottons. This is a cotton blend, and so I sprayed it down generously, and then I ironed it with steam. I'm not even sure if you're supposed to use steam, but I use steam. And I ironed it down, and I actually let it sit for a few minutes before I tackled it, before I put the iron to it, to make sure that the starch adhered to the fibers of the fabric well. And this actually says, control the level of stiffness with a single or multiple application, restore bodies to laundered fabric, makes cutting easier. And that's absolutely true. So this is the first thing I did, was to starch the fabric and iron it. The second thing that I did was to cut with a layer of paper beneath the fabric. And I actually had this paper, I ran out of my medical exam paper that I like to cut my fabrics with. And I went to Walmart, I don't know, however long ago, and I bought this. I don't like it. It's too thick. It doesn't feel as nice as the medical exam paper, and you can't see through it. And so I had this on hand, and I decided to use this. And so, yes, just put a layer of paper underneath your fabric. So basically, you're gonna have a sandwich that is the paper, well, your cutting mat, of course, the paper, your fabric, single layer, instead of cutting on the fold, and then of course your tissue for your pattern piece. So that's the second layer. So having that layer of paper underneath your fabric keeps the fabric from shifting about while you are trying to cut it and mark it. The third is use a rotary cutter. I have a Fiskars rotary cutter. I don't know what size this is, but my daughter bought this for me for Christmas last year, and I like it because it automatically locks. So when I'm done with it, I can push this little knobby thing here, and it locks in place. And so it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool to play with, but you really shouldn't be playing with this. But while it's in use, it's that's when the blade is exposed. But when not in use, it's secured. So it just keeps it a little bit more secure. So this is what I use for cutting out the fabric. I don't use scissors when I'm cutting like this. I actually I don't know. I like cutting with scissors and with the rotary cutter. So I guess for me it depends on the fabric that I'm working with. But for sure, if I'm cutting slippery, misbehaving fabrics, I'm definitely using a rotary cutter. And fourth is mark your fabrics and cut the notches out before removing the paper. And the reason this is really important is because when you move the paper, of course, then it shifts. And so you may or may not get a chance to, when you're trying to mark it after the fact, you may not be able to mark it exactly where the mark should be. So the all-important ending point of the dart, for example, you want to make sure that dart point is exactly where it's supposed to be. So before you remove the tissue paper, go ahead and mark your fabric however you choose to do so before you move it. And so yeah, that's it. Those are the ways in which I work with tricky, slippery, want to do their own thing fabric. So if you have any questions, let me know. I will insert a full video of me going through the process of this fabric, of cutting this fabric after, at the end. And so if you have any questions, please let me know. Until next time, take care. Bye. Okay, so to get started, let me tell you what I did. Put some paper on top of my cutting mat, and in order to keep it stable, I used blue painter's tape along the sides to keep it straight. And so now that paper allows me to stabilize this fabric without it shifting everywhere. So now that I have the fabric stable, now that I have the paper on the table, I can go ahead and lay the fabric out without it moving all over the place. Second thing that I did was this fabric on the back is supposed to be cut on fold, and since that can be a bit tricky, I took the single piece of pattern paper that's cut on fold and I traced it out and I cut one whole big piece. So now instead of cutting it on fold, I cut it flat. So let's go ahead and see how I make this work. So since I can't see the lines of the cutting mat through the paper, I opted to cut the paper so that it is within the boundaries of the cutting mat. So now I can line up the edge of I use one of these long quilting, acrylic quilting rulers. I line that up to one of the edges. I line the selvage edge of the fabric along one of the edges on the quilting ruler, so now I can be certain that everything's square. So now that I have the ruler on top of the quilting mat, I can see that I can now align the grain line of the ruler with one of the lines on the ruler, and now I know this is square. And I can go ahead and pin it the way I ordinarily would, or if you use pattern weights, I use both, but I honestly really like pins. If your paper will allow you to pin completely through the paper, the fabric, and the pattern piece, I think that would be ideal. But this paper is very thick and it's not allowing me to do that. But I'm not too worried about it as long as it's not going to move. Here we go. Now for the back, as you can see, it's not moving, it's not shifting. It's pretty cool. So whenever I'm pinning pattern piece to the fabric, I usually pin strategically, and I do so I can use few pins to get it done quickly. I kind of anchor it. But then I also use the weights because it makes me feel better. That's really the truth. It makes me feel better. Okay. So now here's because the front of the pattern piece is a cut 2. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut one side first flip it and then cut it on the other side of the fabric. But I will do that without taking off the center back piece, because I want to make sure that everything is as it's supposed to be. I'm actually going to use a rotary cutter for this process because again, I don't want to risk the fabric lifting up in any way. Before I move this pattern piece, I will go ahead and make my mark my circles lightly. I'm also going to use this time to snip my notches before I move it from, because I'm going to use the same pattern piece for the other side. I guess if you wanted to, you could use this piece here as a pattern piece for the other side. But since I have no markings on this, I won't risk it. Hold it for me, Linda. One of the reasons I pinned the bodice back to the fabric directly, even though I will use pattern weights, is because I can easily move it down. I want this to be a little bit more secure, because I will be shifting it. Okay, so now I've got that all pinned. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shift the fabric down further. So now I have access to the other side. Everything is still flat. The back has enough fabric. So now I take the same back piece and I lay it on the reverse side, making sure the green line is straight. There we go. I get my ruler once again. This time I can actually see the selvage pretty clearly, and so I'll line everything up right there like that. Pin my grain line. And again, I have the fabric now, the pattern piece now on the wrong side, because when I cut it just now, the first piece, I cut it on the right side, the printed side of the pattern paper. Now, the one thing about this process is because the paper is heavy, it is lifting up from the table. To fix that, taping it down would be helpful, but I don't know where I put the tape. Okay, I found the blue tape. It was sitting right next to me the whole time. So, being as though now the paper's curling, I'm gonna put some more tape down to keep that from acting crazy. Okay, so now that's good. Okay, so now I can get back to this. So, like I said, everything is flat. And because I've shifted things around looking for the tape, I want to make sure that everything is still flat and secure. And before I move on any further, I will... Yep. And this is why I prefer to work with pins when I'm doing stuff like this, as opposed to using just pattern weights. Faster doesn't always mean better, at least in my book. So everything is secure. I'm gonna take this time to mark some of my circles and dots before I move stuff. All right, here we go. In case you're wondering what pattern I'm working on this one. Butterick 6554. All right. So now I can go ahead and cut the rest of it out. And because this paper is so heavy, I will need to use pattern weights to keep everything from curling up once I cut it. Cut your notches, and where are my notches for this? Right here. And now I cut the final piece. Again, this is on the pattern papers on the wrong side because I'm cutting the opposite side from what the first one I cut. Well guys, there you go. That's how I work with very slippery fabrics I like to move around. That's how I get them, how I'm able to cut them out so that they're a lot more manageable. And whenever possible, I try to mark them ahead of time before I move them from the paper so that the marks are as accurate as possible. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, give me a thumbs up. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I will do my best to answer all of your questions. And if you have a different way of working with slippery, misbehaving fabrics, let me know in the comment section below, and I'd love to hear from you. With that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.